Today, we're going to talk about the spirits, but not the kind that go hoo-hoo. I'm really excited to introduce Mr. John Trump to you this afternoon. He's originally from Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Communications from Point Park University in Pittsburgh and his Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction from Goucher College in Baltimore. He's a veteran of the U.S. Air Force who for more than 30 years has worked as a reporter and an editor for newspapers in Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, Alabama, and North Carolina. In 2008, he was awarded first-place honors for editorial writing by the North Carolina Press Association. In New Bern, he won a North Carolina Press Association second-place award for his humorous columns. He also led team coverage of Hurricane Floyd, which devastated the eastern part of the state. Currently, Mr. Trump serves as the managing editor of the Carolina Journal. In Still and Barrel, he explores North Carolina distilleries and the spirits they make with a focus on sharing the stories of the distillers themselves and their families. I won't take any more of his time. Please help me welcome Mr. John Trump.
Try to clip this on. Does that work? All right. Let me see here. Thanks for coming. It's kind of like a homecoming for me. I've lived in Madison for 11 years. Before moving to Cary. We have 14-year-old twin boys who go to Raleigh Charter High School. So that's pretty much the impetus for the move. My wife still works at Wake Forest University, so she's making a commute every day until, a couple hours until something shakes out. So I'll tell you how this all happened. In 2015, we went, my wife and I, on the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky. And, I just fell in love with the smells and the sights and the whole deal of it. And then I started, really getting into bourbon and drinking bourbon. And we came home and I was doing some blogging on it for HuffPo and some other things. We came back and this was in the summer, and in the fall, I worked at an online, nonprofit online news organization. I got laid off in December, like a week before Christmas. Yeah, exactly 1 week before Christmas. And, I was still blogging and stuff. And my wife came home one day with this 7 by, 4 inch, it was a passport for North Carolina distilleries. And this was in 2015. She says, "You should check this out," and I'm like, well, okay. And time went on, and I finally made a call to Esteban McMahon at Topo in Chapel Hill. I think everybody's familiar with Topo and a distillery. And he's like, to back up a little bit, I think everybody knows Midnight Moon and Piedmont Distillers, which was actually the first distiller in North Carolina in 2005 to go into business since Prohibition, which ended in 1938. Anyway, he was telling me about the process, and I visited Sutlers in Winston-Salem, and Mayberry in Mount Airy, which is a fantastic distillery because the guy dresses up as a yeast wrangler. He puts on a hat and puts on a big beard, and he's a moonshiner, and it's pretty neat. So I did these blogs in Durham Distillery, and my wife's, and I still hadn't had a job. And she's like, you're not getting paid for this. You probably ought to, if you're going to keep doing this, try to make some money at it. So in one afternoon, I put together a proposal. I emailed Blair Publishing in Winston. And in an afternoon, I put together a proposal. I said, here it is. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, This was a couple weeks later, and when can you have it done? And I said, well, actually, we were sitting at a car wash in Walkertown, going to a travel baseball tournament. And it was April, and my wife's like, when do you think, I asked her, we were just sitting there waiting for people. She said, I said, when can I do this? How fast could I get this done? She's like, oh, September, tell them September. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I did. I told them September, and they're like, great, September 1st. Well, this was April. And at the time, there were 25 distilleries in the passport, but by the time I wrote the book, I went by the quarterly price list from the ABC, there were 36. So there were 36 in a book. And let me read you, I'll read you a little bit up. This is probably the best way to do it with the history of North Carolina distilling. And I can't see, so bear with me. To understand where the fast-growing craft spirits movement is going, it helps to see where things began. Making liquor in North Carolina is nothing new, as anyone who knows a smidgen about the state's history will tell you. In the mid-1800s, lawmakers took a stand against wicked whiskey. In 1903, the growing influence of the Anti-Saloon League led to the passage of the Watts Act, which banned the production and sale of liquor outside incorporated towns, effectively outlawing rural distilleries. In 2005, the war extended prohibition to incorporated towns of fewer than 1,000 inhabitants, meaning that liquor sales were banned in 68 of the 98 counties in the state. Though the 18th Amendment ratified in 1919 made producing, selling, transporting, and importing liquor a crime, North Carolina jumped on the prohibition wagon much sooner. They started in 1908, actually, and then it really didn't end until 1938. 1937 is when an alcohol beverage control system was set up to sell alcohol in North Carolina, which makes us a controlled state. And we're one of 17 controlled states in the country, which everything's got to go through the ABC. State allowed breweries and wineries to operate shortly after Prohibition. North Carolina lawmakers didn't lift the ban on making liquor until 1979. So it was 1979 until you could actually even distill here. 100 years ago, North Carolina had more distilleries than any state in the nation, and then all of a sudden it went away, says Keith Norton of Carolina Distillery in Lenore. And they make basically apple brandy. I'll tell you a little bit about that later. In 1938, the National Alcoholic Beverage Control Association was founded to represent the state control systems under which state governments took over the wholesale trade and conducted retail sales of heavier alcoholic beverages through its own sources. Yeah, and as I said, North Carolina is one of 17 control states in the country. And I mean, there's been movement throughout the House. It wasn't until the House and a General Assembly, it wasn't until 2015, McCrory signed a bill allowing distilleries, and by that time there were quite a few. There were more than 20 or so. They allowing distillers to sell one bottle of liquor per person per year. So you can go in and buy one bottle, not one bottle of each thing they offer, one bottle, and it's a calendar year. So, 364 days later, or 5 days, you can go back and buy another bottle. And they've been really happy about that. It really opened things up. Allowed them to show their product. And this year, House Bill 909 began the process, which became an omnibus bill called the Brunch Bill. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but it gives municipalities local option to serve brunch beginning at 10 o'clock on Sunday, serve liquor beginning at 10 o'clock on Sunday as opposed to noon, which opens the way for grocery stores too. But one part of the bill that I think the media mostly ignored, the mainstream media, was the 5-bottle. Now distilleries can sell 5 bottles per customer per year. They track it with your license and everything, so it's pretty stringent. But if you come in with 2 people, and a lot of distilleries like it because people come from out of state and they want to buy stuff and take back, which you can't normally get. Well, 1 bottle, 2 bottles to 10 is a much bigger deal. It also allowed for tastings. Really the only prohibition, which brewers or wineries can do, they could offer tastings and festivals, and now they got to jump through some hoops. But distilleries can do it now too. I mean, they could offer a tasting at a festival or whatever it is, depending, of course, on local approval. One problem, I mean, one issue they have, they can't sell online, distillery direct to another state, which stinks because they have to go through another company or firm or whatever to sell it, like in South Carolina, Virginia, or Tennessee or whatever. So the excise taxes goes to that state. They don't go here. So we're losing out on all the money. And the General Assembly, I mean, there is, and I know we're in the heart of the Bible Belt, and that still prevails in the General Assembly. Sitting through all the committee meetings last year as these bills went through the process, you don't want to know how the sausage is made. Believe me, it's pretty. You sit there and just roll your eyes. One lawmaker, because it also allowed breweries to make growlers, which is 32-ounce cans, which we couldn't have before. You could have growlers, but not just cans. And it's a can of beer. And she said, "Well, how do we know if it's sealed?" There was somebody there from the beer lobby. And they said, "Well, it's a can." I'm like, and this went on for 5 or 10 minutes. I was like, it's a can. When have you ever gotten a can that wasn't sealed in some way or another, inherently making it a can? But also what hurts them too is they can't make mixed drinks. Like, for example, the Outer Banks distillery in Manteo, which if you're ever in the Outer Banks and you want to go to the distillery, they're just awesome. They make rum. But a lot of people just don't want straight rum. But when you go to a tasting at a distillery, that's what you get, straight whatever it is. I mean, they could put a bottle of Coke or whatever out there and say, you can mix it if you want. But now in Tennessee and Kentucky, they've opened it up where you can make mixed drinks and sell it, which we haven't done. So even though I know Cooper declared October NC Spirits Month, and Democrats are a little more lenient on it than Republicans have been, but it still goes both ways. And there's a long way to go. Let me tell you about the ABC process too. Now, when these guys make liquor, first of all, you have to have a still to actually get a license. Well, you buy a still and then you learn, and 2 years later I figured it out now, but you have all this investment in it. So they have to do that. The bottle's got to be approved. The label's got to be approved throughout both the state and the TTB, the federal branch of it. And as far as the ABC process goes, no matter where you are in North Carolina, whether you're in Manteo or Asheville or Mount Pleasant or Snow Hill, everything goes through Raleigh. So if you're in Manteo and you want to sell or put your stuff in an ABC store, down the street, a mile away, it's got to go to Raleigh, and they put it in a warehouse in Raleigh. So it goes. The truck takes it from there to Raleigh, then back to Manteo or wherever else throughout the state. So it's a central distribution point. Now some distillers like it because it's uniform pricing. You pay what you want throughout the state. But the problem is there are 422 or so ABC stores in North Carolina, and 167 boards, ABC boards. I think there's just one here, but Mecklenburg or Wake, they have several boards. So to put your whatever it is into, the ABC store, you got to go to the board, and you've got to say, and they can't taste it. You got to sell them on it and say, here, look, I'm making this. Will you put it in the ABC store? Then the problem when it gets to the ABC store, if you notice, it's in a North Carolina section. I mean, the gin's not with the gin, the rum's not with the rum. It's all North Carolina stuff. And furthermore, you're battling the Diageos, the Suntories, the Camparis, these used conglomerates, which I know from personal experience, they've got money to burn. I mean, they just do. Diageo, offered me a trip to Crown Royal and Beam's the same thing, and they'll send bottles of $80 liquor. They're not going to do that here. And, and furthermore, it's like if you're going to drop $40 on a bottle of liquor, you'd like to know what it tastes like. But that was part of the bill too. But tastings in liquor stores, which you can do in Virginia and South Carolina for sure. That got turned down here too. So they're facing a steep hill. Like I say, the first distillery was Piedmont here in 2005, and Joe's a good friend of mine. He's a good guy, but he doesn't actually distill the liquor. He buys it from Indiana, MGP most probably, which makes the stuff and it just ships it, and then he puts fruit in it or whatever it is. And then, that's a point of contention among a lot of distillers, that he doesn't actually make it. And I think that's what's so cool about it, just the stories here. You go from a really small distillery like Howling Moon in Asheville, which is basically in this cave. It's got a condenser it's not a cave, but it's just an outbuilding. It's condenser's like 150 years old. And he dates back to the Scots-Irish. His ancestors made it, and I think when you're looking at like Sugarlands and a lot of these moonshines, quote unquote moonshines you see on the shelf, which come from big distillers, because there are only a few national or international distributors that sell this stuff. If you really take a look at it, they own 30 or 40 labels of different things. And he's like, this is awful. This is awful. It's, it's neutral grain spirit, and what a neutral grain spirit is basically rubbing alcohol. It's a little more than that. But it's distilled to such a high proof, 190 or so, and that's all it is. It's neutral grain. You distill it so much you take the essence of the grain out, which I think is cool here because you have people making vodka from sweet potatoes. In the corn taste, and Tiny Cat makes a wheat vodka in Greensboro. If you've not been there, it's delicious, and they keep an essence of the original grain in it. But when you're distilling it to NGS, there's nothing left. But you go from like Howling Moon to people like Troy and Sons, and everybody knows her story. I think she had two really developmentally disabled children, and needed a way to make money. They were in Texas. They went broke. They moved to North Carolina, Asheville, because the climate was better. And they're in their 30s, these boys now, and they can't take care of themselves in any way, shape, or form. So she's like, I'm going to start making liquor. So she hooked up with a guy, John McIntyre, who has a farm near Asheville. And they played and played and played to get this recipe right. And how they got together, she had tasted his grits, this heirloom corn. And she's like, oh man, I like that. And he just used it to make, cornbread and stuff. He probably really wasn't growing it. But he's like, I like this. Let's try to make liquor out of it. So they worked on it, and until they got something. And they do make some, darn good stuff. But it's like Manteo or Southern Grace, which is in a prison it's an old prison, Cabarrus County Correctional Facility in Mount Pleasant, which is around Charlotte. Muddy River, which makes great rum. Just go up and down the line to the Calls, which makes moonshine. Willie Clay Call was a contemporary of Junior Johnson, and they ran together, and it's the same recipe they used in the woods to make moonshine. And Brian Call said, well, the difference is it's the same recipe, it's the same stuff. Because there's this kind of lore that, I'm drinking moonshine I made in the woods, so it's better. That's not better, it's the same stuff. But here it's made in a sanitary facility, and you're not pulling a possum out of your mash tank or mash pot in the woods, But you got to give a lot of credit. The original passport was the Department of Agriculture. Put it together and printed it for everybody. And I think it was like $1.50 a piece to print them. And so they said, no, that's too much, we're not going to do it again. But they made the original run of them. And I don't have one with me, but it's a pamphlet. If you've ever been on a bourbon trail, it's like a passport, and they stamp it everywhere you go. But they've really pushed it. I know they push the beer and a wine. They push apples and corn and pecans and honey. Because it's all part of agriculture. It's all part of stuff from the state. Most of these distillers use local corn or local wheat. Topo, for example, uses red organic wheat, soft red organic wheat from a farm in Scotland Neck. So they're using North Carolina products, whether it's like Manteo makes a run with pecans and honey, which is sourced locally. Van McCoy at the Mayberry Distillery makes a sorghum whiskey, and he gets away calling it whiskey because he uses the grains. Whiskey has to be made from grain to be called whiskey. So he uses the grains from the sorghum and makes a sorghum whiskey, which is sweet. And I tell everybody this is, if you're going to buy vodka or any white liquor, buy North Carolina liquor. I mean, if you're going to buy bourbon, that's a different story because they've been doing it since the 30s or probably before that. So they have some time on it. But North Carolina distillers are starting to age stuff, and it's going to be world class too. But as of now, if you're going to buy anything white, look for a North Carolina liquor. I know Smirnoff and Bacardi is a little bit cheaper. Some cases a lot cheaper. And you can just go. Somebody at the ABC store grabs a jug of, Bacardi. I'm like, oh man, I don't buy that crap. But support North Carolina distillers. And as far as the agriculture goes, I was talking about Carolina Distillery. Lowe's Orchard, which is I think on a borderline of Perry Lowe, Wilkes, and Alexander counties, they have apple orchards, and he gets all his apples from them. They do his mash, and twice a year when the apples are ready, come back and they mash it, and he makes really good. I mean, brandy inherently has to be from fruit, So whiskey's grain, and brandy is fruit. So it's an amazing. He makes a strawberry one too, but it's local. It's like right down the street, which is cool. There's a guy in Benson, Jeremy Norris, who his grandfather raised him. And they had a produce stand on, I think it's Route 50, before they built 40 that goes through there. And he raised him, and they talked about making whiskey and stuff all the time. And Jeremy actually made wine and took it to the camp down our street and tried to sell when he was like 14. But his grandfather told him one time, you should make moonshine one day. And he was like 14 years old. He's like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But his grandfather died, and he said, I need to do something with this, because he had started building this produce stand. He was building it up, and he's like, I'll just keep building it. And he got the idea to make whiskey. He's like, yeah, I don't know why the hell I got in this. This is the stupidest thing I've ever done. Because most people will tell you that. Because right now, people like Jeremy and even Troy and Sons are just finally starting to make a profit after 10 years or so. I mean, actually taking a paycheck. Because it's passion, it's a love for the history. And it's not, I talked to a group a couple weeks ago, and they said, well, how do you promote, not abstinence so much as, being responsible? Well, first of all, kids aren't going to go buy a $40 bottle of liquor and chug it. I mean, it's about the taste, it's about the history, and it's about supporting North Carolina. And like I say, the sweet potatoes, I think North Carolina is one of the world's largest producers of sweet potatoes. And they make a vodka, because when you till the potatoes out of the ground, they're not all perfect. And the ones that aren't perfect, well, they thought, hey, let's figure out how to make some vodka out of this. So, I mean, vodka could be made from a starch or a grain or anything. And you can still taste the sweet potato there. So, I even talked to one guy. I mean, as far as the moonshine goes, he makes a product called Still Blue, and it's a moonshine. He's up in the woods, and he won't tell anybody where he is. I mean, it's tough when you're trying to sell this stuff and market it. He won't tell anybody where it is or how. He doesn't give tours. He doesn't use Google. I called him up and it says, I'm doing this book because as I started writing this, the more the stories came online. I'm trying to catch up. I'm like, can I talk to you about your moonshine? He's like, yeah, $500 I'll talk to you. I'm like, what? He's like, oh, and but he turned out to be like an hour later. It turned out to be pretty cool. What's important here too, if you've ever been to a big distillery, whether it's Beam or Crown Royal, it's like a factory. that covers, 100 acres. We flew above when I was in Crown Royal in Gimli, Winnipeg, the warehouses, and there were like 18 warehouses, just huge, millions and millions of barrels, just of Crown. And when they're distilling this stuff, they distill it at a production level. So when you're cutting it means when the first stuff that comes out is toxic, your 4 shots, and then your heads, and then you get your hearts. But they're doing it hand by hand. They're doing it by hand. They're watching this still and doing it along the way. And some of these stills are like this size. Pine Top in Raleigh, which makes a moonshine and now a gin. I mean, it's like this big. Raleigh rum's the same way. It's by hand. And when you're cutting it and you get to your tails and stuff, I mean, they're not so diligent. But a lot of times they'll just take the tails and mix them back in and redistill them. But here they won't do that. I mean, there's a guy even in Durham who makes liqueurs. He makes a thing called Krupnicus. It's like a honey, spiced honey, and other spices. It's like an old world recipe from Ukraine or something like that. It's delicious. He uses neutral grain spirits, but then he takes it in the barrel and mixes it all together. He makes a line of other products too, which is it's pretty amazing. And like I say, it's world class stuff. So when you're at a liquor store, just think about getting North Carolina spirits. And going back to the legal stuff, if it's made in the woods, you don't know what the proof is. You don't know who made it, what's in it. I mean, here you do. And you could visit these guys and you could talk to them. And I think it's what's so cool about this book is the stories involved in it. And I think the lawmakers are starting to realize. I was talking to Andrew Norman of Tiny Goat Spirits, Fainting Goat. Tiny Cat is the vodka. Fainting Goat Spirits is what it is. And he said that I think the lawmakers are starting to realize, regardless of your prejudices against alcohol. Now, there's not such prejudice because the lawmaker I was talking about said, well, beers and wines here, I can't do anything about it, but liquor, we could stop. I think they're starting to realize that, even with the 5-bottle deal now, that it's actually a boon to the state, and if we promote it and get out in front of it. But it's still a battle, and it's... And I think if you look at the book and you read the stories about each distiller and how they got there and what they do and their story, it's all personal. There's no big companies involved. There's no big hedge funds or investors. I mean, some are bigger. Topo now. I mean, Scott Maitland does well with the restaurant, I imagine, and with and now the distillery, and they're starting to age stuff. They just came out with a spice rum. They're big, but people like Lassiter's in Nightdale, I mean, he's making rum. He's starting to age a rum. So I guess the key issue, the bottom line is if, you wanted to explore liquor, and I wish more people would know this, that explore it with North Carolina stuff. So any questions, any thoughts? Distilleries? Yes, you could do 1.5 ounces.
Do they
all
sell
told.
Do they sell it at the distillery or just at the ABC?
No, at the distillery. You can, in 2015, you could buy 1 bottle per year. Now you could buy 5 bottles.
At the distillery?
At the distilleries, yeah.
Who makes the sweet potato vodka?
It's Covington. It's called Covington. And it's pretty widespread. I can't remember if they have it here because I know in Reedsville's got a really nice ABC store. So I'm pretty confident they would have it here. And like Greensboro Distilling too, you can go buy it there.
These rums that you're talking about,
Uh-huh.
one of my favorite beverages is just Gosling's rum, like dark,
Right.
not spiced. Are any of them making a dark rum like that?
Well, part of the reason it's really good because it's been in a barrel a while, and these guys haven't had the chance to. Now, Raleigh Rum does make a dark rum, but they only age it for like 60 days. But what they do is it's sweet, and I don't know if you like that. It's a little sweeter. They go back and they put molasses into it after it's been in a barrel. It's like a good after dinner drink or before dinner. Yeah, right. Yeah, it'd be really good. See, I typically don't drink mixed drinks, but yeah, that
You
would.
just put soda in now.
Yeah. Yeah, but they make a sweet dark rum that's really delicious, and Raleigh rum. Raleigh rum, yeah.
Who's got the best whiskey, in your opinion?
Actual whiskey. I don't know. There's a guy in Jacksonville, Philip O'Hara, and he's one of these guys he's literally off the beaten path. I mean, we couldn't even find his place. We took a there was a couple, turned right on a third gravel road. We took the first gravel road and ended up like in a quarry, and then we finally found it, and he pounded out a still by himself, and he makes a whiskey it's Diablo Distilleries. It's called Hellhound. And it's, he flash ages it as mostly everybody does. Now, Topo's releasing a reserve that's been in a barrel a couple years to be called a straight whiskey. It's got to be in a barrel for 2 years. Bourbon has a 51% corn made in it. They have their own list of requirements. But that's really good. Topo makes a good whiskey. I think Troy and Sons with that heirloom corn. The blonde is really delicious. I mean, I'm a bourbon guy and I like the bite. Southern Grace and the Prison, it came out with a bourbon they're releasing, I think, tomorrow called Conviction. And she sent me a bottle ahead of time, and it's pretty darn delicious too. And I tell you what, give it some, because they've got barrels. It's in a prison, so they've got rooms with barrels in it. So give it some time, and once it ages. No, it closed in like 2011. It used to be a prison, but it is a prison because they kept the prison part. I mean, no, there's no prisoners, but they kept the ambiance, so to speak. I mean, it's all behind bars and the gift shops, like in solitary. We used to be solitary confinement. So yeah, it's just a lot of fun, cool places to go. Sutlers. Scott Sanborn in Winston-Salem makes a gin that's pretty darn incredible too. My wife also fell in love with this cucumber, I think it's cold distilled cucumber vodka that Durham Distillery makes. That's pretty darn delicious too. And several people make spiced rum. Jeremy makes a spiced rum, and Topo just came out with a spiced rum. So if you're into the spiced rum, try that. I mean, it's really nice.
Are there still any of those? You said there was a passport at the beginning, and
there aren't anymore. No.
We would just need to use your book, kind of as a passport.
Yes. Well, there are probably. I mean, it's growing exponentially. I think. Well, there are 36 distilleries in a book. There are 60-some licenses out there waiting to be approved, and there's more than 40 distilleries now operating in North Carolina. Nobody who really just jumps out at you. There's a lot of vodka, and because it's easy to make vodka. I mean, relatively, if you're making liquor, it's easy to make vodka. But yeah, I mean, it starts in the west, Asheville, goes to the east, goes to Raleigh and Charlotte. There's a guy in Raleigh, Ollie Mulligan, who makes a thing called Rua. It's single malt, which is just single malted barley. It's really good. And when he gets that thing aged in barrels for a while, Defiant is in Golden Valley, basically Bostic, and I know they have that pretty widespread look too. They make it a rye now too, but he uses oak spirals, so he makes the whiskey and he puts it in a vat and puts these oak spirals in there for I think it's 30, 45 days. And that's how he ages his whiskey. Now he'll tell you, and if you read the book, he has a detailed explanation why it's just as good as the barrel. I don't know. Maybe it is to some people, but
You lose less liquor, I guess, that way.
well, that's true too. It doesn't evaporate. Right. Yeah, that's true. But I think the problem is with a lot of, I mean, Defiant's good. It really is. And Rue is good. And some of them, and I won't mention a couple that are just too freaking oaky. I mean, you can just taste You know, we got a thing of moonshine one time, and we decided we were going to bought some chips. We thought we were going to do it ourselves. We left it in like a week, like sucking on a piece of firewood. So it's yeah, you got to be you got to be delicate with it, you know. So. But yeah, it's cool to explore. It's a cool thing. I know breweries and wineries are out front right now, but and you know I haven't found a bad brewery in North Carolina for sure either. So distilleries, like I say, if you're going to buy a clear spirit, look at North Carolina stuff.
You still can't distill at home, though.
No,
I wonder if they'll
legally anyway.
Legally, yeah.
Well, that's how a lot of these guys learned. I mean, they learned in their garages because I mean you can't buy a still. I mean, like Troy and John McIntyre out on his farm, you know, like two mad scientists in a barn with a still. It was illegal, but I mean, you know, you can't charge it unless you're caught. But you know, it's like, how are we going to buy a still if I haven't done this before, and then start making liquor? It's like I got my license, but I don't know how to make it. You know what I'm saying? You get to learn to make it, then you get your license, you get ready to go. Otherwise, you're there a couple years, you know. And it takes a while with all the paperwork. I mean, some are faster than others, but all the labels come back 3 or 4 times. No, this isn't right. Or the bottles, no, it looks too much like this bottle. Change it. One thing to keep in mind too when you're buying any kind of liquor, look for distilled and bottled. If it says bottled or produced, it's typically sourced. It's typically bought from Indiana or somewhere else. And a lot of bourbons are like that. Bullet was always like that. And it's pretty much Four Roses, I think. But they just built a distillery. Now they're distilling it. But they've got a ways to go before they get it in a barrel. So, I mean, just pay attention to that. If you look at like Midnight Moon, not to call him out or anything, but it'll say produced by. Tito's Vodka, I don't know if you know Tito's Vodka. It says handcrafted. I mean, it's not handcrafted by any stretch of the imagination. No, he's buying it. He handcrafted one batch, and there were several lawsuits which brought all this to the fore. That, you know, you say handcrafted, and I think the courts decided that you can't really define handcrafted because a lot of will tell you, well, it's handcrafted because we put the cherries in there. You know, but like the Calls, they make several moonshines. They make a strawberry, I think a cherry, apple pie. You know, apple pie moonshine, which is absolutely delicious. They use quick frozen fruit, but they make the liquor. You know, and the mash barrels are made of soft pine. You know, locally sourced that they built. He bought the still. It's a Vendome still, and he put it on the back of a flatbed and drove it from Kentucky or Louisville and put it up. So, I mean, it's all hand to mouth in a lot of ways, and it's all grassroots, and it's not what you think. Because when you walk into a liquor store, you think kind of everything's the same, and you maybe look at the cheaper stuff, but it's not. You know, it's not even Jim Beam, which is Booker's is one of my favorite whiskeys. But I mean, that place is a monstrosity, and they've been doing it forever, and they've got a process. You know, and these guys are pretty much doing it like Tim Ferriss told me when they were making the rye, he couldn't get it right, and he blew a hose out. Rye is really sticky grain, and it's really tough, which is why a lot of people shy away from it. Broad Branch Distillery in Winston-Salem, too, makes a great moonshine. They also make a Smashing Violet, it's called. It's like a blueberry moonshine. I think it's blueberry, but it's really good. It's infused with blueberries. But he tried a rye, too, which he has in barrels, and he's waiting to release it. But he had such a hard time with it because of the temperatures. And, you know, I'm not a distiller. I can't speak to the science of it necessarily so much, but it's a tough, for what I understand, it's a tough grain. There's another bourbon out, too. There's a bourbon, 1712 makes a bourbon in Conover, but it's flash aged. And Andrew Porter, Doc Porter's, who named his distillery after, it's in Charlotte, who named his distillery after his grandfather, and he's sort of a chemist. He's coming out with a bourbon too, and it is out. It's just kind of hard to find. So just to raise awareness of all this and to give these guys a break, because they certainly don't get a break from the legislature, and the laws of North Carolina.
No, I didn't even know there was a North Carolina section in the liquor store, so now I'll look for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you go, like I said, I lived in Madison, and they had when you walk in, they had like Midnight Moon, and I think they had like Carolina Distillery stuff and some Troy and Sons sometimes. Depends on where you go. Like in Raleigh and Wake County or Mecklenburg County, you get you can pretty much get anything that made in the state, but it's in the North Carolina section, which is the thing. Yeah, it's stuck in the back of a store. You got to bust your butt to get it in the store, because you can't just go to one. You got to go to 167 different boards and say, please put my liquor in your ABC store. And once you do that, then it's up to them what to do with it. And like I say, Beam and Campari and they're printing money, and they got a lot of money. I think they're going to get a little, more play from the ABC guys. Just human nature, I guess.
Does ABC control the price of the liquor in the distillery itself?
Yeah, they set it. It's the same price throughout the state. So something goes on sale in Manteo, it's on sale in Asheboro too. It's the same price.
I mean, like at the distillery itself, if I go and buy direct the 5 bottles, are they the same?
Well, no, they suggest a price, but then they add the taxes onto it. And, yeah, right. So, by the time, they only get a very small cut of that, because it's like adding 50% to it. They get 30% or something.
That would make more than going through the distributor that way. I mean, that's where a brewery makes their money in the tap room.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and they can't do that.
Yeah.
They can't do that here. Yeah, the brewery makes their money, and you go get a beer, and you can make a one-off. I mean, you can make a one-off beer and say, here, this is my mocha chocolate milk stout. But a distillery can't do that because they have to have so many cases. I don't know what the exact number is, 10 cases or something in the warehouse at any point in time. So unless they can ship that much, then they're not going to take it. So it's just a lot of regulatory hurdles.
Does anybody ever foresee the control loosening?
Well, like I said, when I was in the ABC's got a powerful lobby, and it's so entrenched. It's been there since 1938. And one of their arguments was that, distilleries are right next to ABC stores, and the average ABC store from a distillery in North Carolina is 2.5 miles. So why would you buy at the distillery when you just go to the ABC store and buy everything you want? So why would we expand this? I think the percentage is way less than 1%. Of all the liquor sold in ABC stores, it's North Carolina liquor. It's, way less. It's way less than 1%. So it's like, you're not cutting into it. And you go to an ABC store and you just sit there and watch, because I kind of do. You don't get people don't buy North Carolina liquor. And like Walnut Cove, it's funny, a little store there, their managers do a great job of stocking North Carolina liquor and pushing North Carolina liquor. Here, Reedsville's got a good ABC store. Madison, I know, doesn't, and they don't push. They push Midnight Moon. But unless you know what you're buying, and Midnight Moon's like the top-selling moonshine in the world right now. I think he's in 15 countries, but made in Indiana. So inform consumers, I suppose, and the more you know about stuff, the better off or maybe worse off you are.